And good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. I am going to be giving the sixth and penultimate lecture in the original Astronist lecture series. My name is Cometan, and today the lecture is titled The Dynamics and Foundations of Astronism. This is going to be a lecture mainly centered around meta-Astronist theory and sort of exploring what astronism is and sort of the internal structures that make astronism what it is, rather than the more specific elements of its beliefs in terms of its eschatology, soteriology, theology, which is topics that we've covered in previous lectures. The next lecture after this one, which will be the final lecture in the founding era, and it will also be the final lecture in the original Astronist lecture series, is called The Total Immersion into Astronism, and I'm really excited for that one. It's going to be an extensive exploration into astronism, really in depth. So that could be a few hours long, that lecture. So really excited for that, but let's get on with today's lecture. The presentation today will explore, as I've said, the components and features of astronism that relate to other belief systems. So we'll be comparing astronism with other belief systems, or talking about how astronism is different from other belief systems. This presentation's aim is to provide an understanding of how astronism functions as a belief system. So this is, and how the different forms it may take, and how we study what astronism is. So this is a lecture that's a little bit different from the ones that you've already seen in the original Astronist lecture series. So what makes astronism astronism? Well, the term itself can be split into sort of two parts. You've got astron or astro, which obviously denotes the stars. And then you've got ism, which is a belief system or denotes some type of belief or religion. And this could literally then mean the religion of the stars, or the belief system of the stars, or the philosophy of the stars. So that's essentially why astronism is called what it is, because it's centered on the stars, of course, and we believe that the astronomical world is the existential source. Just to give you an overview, really, of sort of the different terminology that we use when we refer to astronism. Of course, astronism is the name of the belief system. An astronist is therefore a follower of that belief system. I, Cometan, am the founder of this belief system. The omnidoxy is the name of the founding book of this belief system. The vendox is the name of the main symbol. You can see it there on the right-hand side of this screen. Astroncy is the designation of astronism. So what that essentially means is, although we may refer to astronism as a religion or as a philosophy or simply as a belief system, these designations they're good in terms of their widespread use, but they don't always capture the entirety of what astronism is. So when you're referring to astronism as a religion, yes, it can be referred to as a religion, but that doesn't really capture the philosophical aspects of astronism or the sort of ideological political aspects of astronism. So therefore, what I'm developing at the moment still is this concept of astroncy, or stellancy, we also refer to it as. And this is what I would refer to as a new type of belief system that astronism and other similar belief systems can be classified as. And I think this is definitely required, but still needs more development as we go into the establishment era. Continuing on with our list, we've got cosmocentrism, which is the official worldview of astronism. You will have heard me speak about cosmocentrism quite a lot in these different lectures and across the lecture series. And also you've got astronality there, which is sort of the main emotion or the main experience of astronism. This is really the central concept of astronism, you could say, is that a person can have and do have emotional connections to the stars, emotional attachments to the astronomical world, which then leads on to having beliefs about the astronomical world. And of course, astronality has been crucial to the development of the astronic tradition. So that's, of course, really important. And if you've watched some previous lectures, you'll have heard about this concept or this word astronality before. And then finally, we've got astrosis and cosmosis, which are, I've classified them here as central beliefs, and they certainly are. They're not the only central beliefs, but they're pretty important and they're pretty central. We've spoke about astrosis a lot in the previous lecture, which was the astral mysticism lecture. And also cosmosis, we will have spoken about that in the eschatology lecture, which was a few lectures back from this one. So we've covered a lot of these central aspects of astronism throughout this lecture series. Just before we get into sort of the meta-Astronist elements, the fundamental sort of goal of meta-Astronism really is to define astronism. And this is a continuing, ongoing activity that I'm, constantly trying to better all the time. More recently, this was a definition that I tried to explain, to bring about. This one's sort of, it began as quite a simple definition, but then sort of expanded as time went on. So let's read it together. Astronism is a belief system. Notice there that I've used the more general term belief system rather than religion or philosophy or spirituality. Astronism is a belief system that gives a central importance to the notion that outer space possesses salvific capacities for humankind through both its physical exploration and through emotional, intellectual, and mystical engagements with the astronomical world. Let's stop there and let's have a look at what that all means. So astronism is a belief system that gives a central importance. So the central importance part of that definition signals to us, of course, that this is the fundamental, foundational concept within astronism, you could say. The notion that outer space possesses salvific, if you don't know what that word means, it means, of course, salvation or leading to salvation, which itself refers in astronism to a sort of a broader, not really a moral salvation, but more of an existential one. More of a sort of intertwined with destiny and intertwined with the concept that in order to make the most of our species, we need to sort of explore the astronomical world in all of its many capacities. Possesses salvific capacities for humankind through both its physical exploration, so this is talking about space exploration, of course, and through emotional. Now, the emotional part relates to astronality. This relates to a person's emotional connections or psychological connections or engagements with the astronomical world, with outer space, and also the prospects of outer space as well, the future prospects that space exploration or outer space will grant to humanity. The intellectual, well, of course, that means philosophical contemplation. That means engaging with scientific astronomy, engaging with scientific observations of the astronomical world. And then also you've got the mystical engagements. And this, of course, relates more to the religious, spiritual sides of astronism. The mystical engagements, this was the main topic of the previous lecture in this series, astral mysticism, engaging with the astronomical world at that mystical level, that deeper mystical level that is very much distinct from the emotional and intellectual engagements or levels. The second half of this this definition focuses on astronism really as having been founded to act as a guide to achieve this kind of salvation, which is called transcension, when referring to the salvation of humanity as a whole by means of the astronomical world, and is called astrosis when referring to salvation of the individual. So the second half really of this definition refers or is trying to provide clarity as to the two branches of this salvation that we're talking about in astronism. Of course, transcension refers, as I've said in the definition, to sort of the collective salvation of humankind through the astronomical world, whereas astrosis refers to sort of a more individual, personal salvation from the astronomical world. And again, this is the astrosis part was what we discussed in our previous lecture, the journey to astrosis part of that lecture. So here, what I'm trying to show is that there are two separate dimensions of astronist salvation, one that is collective and one that is individual. And that without, in a way, the individual aspects, we can't have the collective. And without the collective, we can't have the individual in some senses. But this is what we could call a very soteriological definition of astronism. I'm focusing here very much on the salvation aspects of astronism, whereas other definitions of astronism may take a more theological form, or may take a more eschatological form, or whatever other aspects of astronism you can, and this is quite an interesting aspect of astronism, really. And any other religion, in a way, you can define the religion or the belief system according to a specific theme, a specific type of theme. So, of course, in this, it's very soteriological. It's very much based on the idea of salvation and that humankind can achieve salvation through the astronomical world, both as a collective and as individuals. So central to meta-Astronism really is what we call Astronist theory. Astronist theory is the extension of astronism as a belief system into philosophical, social, and cultural discourses. And this regards examining the role of space exploration, astronomical observation, and simply the environment of outer space as it has related to human life since prehistoric times. This is something that is, of course, central to astronist philosophical discourses. In astronist philosophy, we are concerned with what the role of space exploration will be for humankind. We are concerned primarily with sort of the nature of astronomical observation and how that's influenced human society, or simply, as I've said, the environment of outer space as a whole, how we as humans relate to outer space, both as individuals and as a collective species. So, and of course, the prehistoric times element there is bringing in the idea of the astronic tradition, and that these concepts and these sort of engagements with the astronomical world are not they're not something new in some ways. There are aspects, of course, a lot of aspects that are new that have been founded with astronism. But of course, there's a lot of other aspects that are very prehistoric in origin and have really been central to the development, not only of religion, but of humankind itself. So astronist theory extends into various fields, including anthropology, sociology, media studies, psychology, ecology, and so on and so forth. This really demonstrates the idea that space exploration, outer space, astronomical observation as a whole can really be analyzed in terms of the anthropological, sociological, impacts of those activities that humanity has conducted since prehistoric times. Fundamentally, though, astronist theory explores philosophically, those interactions between humanity and the world above us, which of course I mean the outer space and all that is entailed by outer space. So now that we've sort of covered defining astronism, and then also now that we've covered also sort of how astronism is sort of now that I've covered sort of how astronism can be defined and how also it can be, as I've said on the previous page, I can show here, sorry. Now that I've explored defining astronism, what astronism means, pretty much in a soteriological conception, and also we've explored Astronist theory and sort of what that means in terms of the philosophical engagements with astronism in other fields, we can now move on to the main subject, which is meta-Astronism. Meta-Astronism is the study of astronism as it relates to itself, meaning the study of the internal components that make astronism what it is. Meta-Astronist theory is really important in order to kind of define, and it's sort of like a continuous definition of what astronism is in a way. It's meta-Astronist theory is trying to explore how astronism functions as a belief system. This includes the various functions and features making astronism, as well as the ways in which it manifests. We call these the forms of astronism. Astronism manifests in many, many different ways in terms of either astronism's manifestation in a personal sense, in terms of group sense, or in a humanity sense. And these are what we call, there's many of them, of what we call forms of astronism. Other branches of meta-Astronist theory explore the sociological dimensions of astronism, the nature of astronism, so how astronism in a way is different from other religions in the sense that it has a different nature to it, it has a different orientation to it, and how it should be designated, how its beliefs, concepts, and practices can be organized. The designation of astronism is something we've already spoken about earlier in this lecture when I was talking about astroncy and how can astronism really be referred to as a religion or a philosophy or a spirituality. And then the beliefs, concepts, and practices being organized, of course, refers to the different disciplines of astronism. How do we sort of classify the different beliefs? What is part of astronist theology? What is part of astronist soteriology? So astronist taxonomy deals with that. It deals with the placing of all these different beliefs and concepts that are part of astronism, giving them sort of definitive categories in a way. So meta-Astronist theory has a very broad, very also very difficult job to do as well, a difficult responsibility to undertake. Designation theory, as I've just spoke about, refers to how astronism should be categorized and described as a whole. So of course, astronist taxonomy deals with the individual beliefs within astronism. And then, designation theory is therefore the study of how astronism should be categorized and described. In astronist taxonomy that we discussed on the previous slide, we were looking at sort of how concepts and beliefs of astronism, specific concepts and beliefs within astronism can be described and categorized. Whereas designation theory refers to sort of the description of astronomism as a whole. It's very difficult as well to do in a way, because there's lots of connotations with these types of words. Here we have the primary designations: organized philosophy, religion, philosophy, philosophical religion, spirituality, ideology, belief system, and there are others. We also have secondary designations, which are more specific in a way, and more, you could say, telling of a particular theme within astronomism, or a particular aspect of astronomism. There we've got astral religion, astronomical religion, shared philosophy, space religion, space-based religion, and so on. A legal designation for astronomism is one that is used and referred to in non-astronist legal frameworks. So in that sense, what I mean is that astronomism may be regarded as only a religion in certain settings, when we're dealing with governments who don't have the same type of they don't have that same type of sort of scholarly width, if you understand what I mean, in terms of they don't have this capacity yet to define philosophical religion or organized philosophy and things like that. They just have literally religion, and that's it. So in that sense, astronomism would have to be referred to as a religion in a way. So the legal designation can really, in a way, often has to be more simplified than sort of the more scholarly, intellectual designations of astronomism. In one of the previous slides, I was mentioned the forms of astronomism, and these are a series of ways in which astronomism may manifest in the world. So there are 5 primary forms in which astronomism may do this: dispositional, philosophical, practical, religious, and theoretical. Dispositional deals with the various different disciplines that astronomism and the various concepts that come to form astronomism, how they are organized into disciplines of study. And there are hundreds of those that come to form astronomism. There's philosophical aspects, so this deals with ontology, this deals with metaphysics, this deals with essentially, in a way, the meaning of life in some ways. Practical, this deals with the sort of space exploration itself and how astronomism manifests in that way, or astronomical observation, how astronomism and astronist beliefs manifest in terms of stargazing and other related activities. You've got your religious aspects as well, which of course manifest as devotion, in some regards worship, but not as much in astronomism. And then you've also got religious in terms of the more communal aspects of astronomism, and I think sometimes debating can come under religious as well, but it may also come under theoretical. Theoretical generally includes things like reading books on astronomism, just dealing with astronomism in an abstract way rather than a physical form. There also exist temporal forms of astronomism. So astronomism as it manifests at night, astronomism as it manifests during the day, astronomism as it manifests in one's childhood or adolescence, and then astronomism as it manifests towards the end of one's life. You've also got folk astronomism, which entails a broad set of beliefs that can be definitely classified as part of astronomism because they have a space theme to them, but are not officially part of the Astronist Institution's interpretation of astronomism and its presentation of astronomism. There's circumstantial aspects. This generally includes like geographical astronomism, so how astronomism manifests in different parts of the world and how sort of the geographical landscape can affect that. You know, astronomism as it manifests in the city is very, very different to how astronomism manifests in rural areas, mainly because of light pollution. You've got omnidoxical. You can also maybe include in here the upcoming astrodoxical aspects of astronomism or forms of astronomism. This is astronomism as it manifests in a particular book. And then there's many other miscellaneous forms as well, but these really come together to try and understand how astronism and the beliefs of astronism especially and manifest in the world. Essentially, as we've said just now, the forms of astronism framework allows for the ways in which astronist beliefs and practice manifest to be categorized. It allows for all these different aspects of astronism to come and be, yes, categorized into different manifestation forms. So what are the components of astronism? This is a really interesting slide because it explores the dichotomy in astronism between dogma and doctrine. So in astronism, we have two, we have sort of general beliefs and general concepts, you could say. And then above that, we have doctrines, which are the second bullet point down here, which says a concept, theory, or belief that is asserted as holding truth, but whose components and interpretations are interchangeable. An example of this is the scope of man doctrine. For example, the scope of man doctrine is held to be true and certainly holds truth, but that the components and sort of different, and that there can be different interpretations of the scope of man, that there isn't just one interpretation of what the scope of man is, was, or has done for humanity. And so these are very much interchangeable. And then the highest form, or the most, in some ways controversial form, is what we call dogma. Of course, this is used in other religions as well, but in astronism, this refers to a concept or belief regarded as incontrovertibly true, in that it occurs, has occurred, or is right. Agreement to which is often regarded as contingent on being an astronist, of which only 5 presently exist in astronism, including COSMOCENTRISM, which is the worldview of astronism. So therefore, to be an astronist, you have to hold the worldview of an astronist. You have to be able to see the world in the way that astronism does in order for you to be an astronist. So that's why cosmocentrism is a dogma. We've got transcension, which is humanity's struggle to ascend to the stars. You've got astrosis, which is sort of the individual ascension to the stars, which is what we referred to back in the defining astronism slide earlier on. Then you've got ultimationism, which is reaching the ultimate state of human condition, and cosmosis, which is union with the cosmos upon death. Even though these concepts and beliefs that are classified as dogmas, even though these can be interpretable like a doctrine is, for example, cosmosis is very widely interpreted within astronism, the fundamental principle that union with the cosmos occurs on some level is incontrovertibly true in astronism. And this goes for the same in terms of transcension, humanity's struggle to ascend to the stars, and astrosis. These are regarded as incontrovertibly true, that astronism couldn't exist if these concepts were not true, essentially. We've also got receptions. If we're moving on from dogma and doctrines and the dichotomy between those, we also now come to further components of astronism, which are reception, which is knowledge as derived from a mystical or divine source through the intermediary of the astronomical world. So in most schools of astronism, not so much in the naturalistic school, but more so in the constellationist school and other related schools of thought, knowledge is regarded as, well, the astronomical world is regarded as the intermediary of knowledge, really, for all of humanity. So all knowledge is regarded as having been intermediated, between the astronomical world and humankind, and then beyond that, what we call receptions, are sort of a form of knowledge that is defined by its mystical or divine source. Now, proving the sort of authenticity of such a divine source, not so much the mystical, because you can have mystical experiences that can be very much real and very much provable in many ways, through either written documents, which purport to and often, you know, explore mystical aspects, or through just experience of a person's individual experience. Then you've also got divine source, of course, which is the which determining what that is, of course, is very, very difficult. You know, I've had struggles with that in the past, is in terms of defining, are some of the things that I've experienced in my life, are they of divine source or not? And this is sort of an ongoing question, really, that we don't have time to really explore today, but certainly I want to do much more work on reception and how sort of the theory of knowledge within astronism, Astronist epistemology. We've also got inspiration, which is the primary form of how the omnidoxy was composed, which is knowledge is derived through the astronomical world, which is where the knowledge from the omnidoxy came, by way of the human intellect. So that's either celestial mode or ideation. Celestial mode is when ideations or indices come through an induced way. I don't mean in terms of drugs, but I mean in terms of when I'm in a celestial mode, I have induced that. I knowingly went into that mode, whereas ideation and an intense series of ideations being called indices are not induced. Indices are not in a way voluntarily engaged with. Not saying that they're exactly the same as revelation, because that would be more of a divine source, but what I am saying is that they are not chosen to be engaged with in that same sense that a celestial mode is. When for example, the institutional dictionary that I've just completed, I knowingly went into a celestial mode in order to complete that. But with the omnidoxy, the ideations that emerged from the omnidoxy to compose the omnidoxy, and the indices that occurred, they were not intentionally intentionally engaged with, if you understand what I mean there. I didn't think to myself, right, today I'm going to write the omnidoxy. Today I'm going to have these ideas and I'm going to write the omnidoxy from there. That's not how it happened. It came from somewhere else. The ideas came from not an induced way. Whereas the celestial mode, especially for the dictionary that I've just completed, I knowingly set out to go into a celestial mode. So you're still getting ideas, you're still getting ideations, but the difference is that one is sort of knowingly engaged with, and the other is sort of something you can't really help. It's involuntary in many ways. So they're just some components of astronism with regards to epistemological astronism in many ways, the theory of knowledge as it pertains to astronism. And this really nicely leads us on to what we call emotionalism, which is a really, really important concept in astronism that is gaining huge momentum as we're going into the establishment era. Emotionalism really refers and centers onto the concept that we've already come across, the word that we've already come across, which is astronality. Astronism is made distinct from other religions and belief systems in that it is formed on the basis of an emotion. This emotion, of course, is what we call astronality. Astronality is one's personal sense of connection or relation to the astronomical world and is formed by an abundance of other emotions when they relate to the night sky. These can include wonderment, awe, hope, fear, relaxation, contentment, and many others, many others. Fear is an interesting one. Certainly hope, I feel that a lot. And definitely wonderment is a really central one. Emotionalism or astronalism, which what emotionalism may also be referred to as, denotes the fact or quality of astronist beliefs, practices, and philosophy as being based on the experience of an emotion rather than an event having occurred, or even a basic principle or doctrine/dogma. So even though we've just explored what those dogmas and doctrines are, and even though astronism couldn't exist without those dogmas in place, astronism, even those dogmas themselves couldn't exist without astronality having existed prior, and really at the dawn of human creativity at the scope of man. So this is what emotionalism is trying to say, is that, okay, there are doctrines and dogmas in astronism and fundamental worldviews and all these types of things, but fundamentally, astronism is based on the emotional experience of the night sky. And of course, this is what we call astronality. And of course, this influences then all the other aspects of astronism, all really the astronic tradition, and all the different movements that are classified as part of the astronic tradition. This emotionalism concept is very important. And I think it's something that really defines astronism from Christianity, from Islam, from Buddhism, for example. Those religions seem to be, okay, they're based on certain concepts and dogmas, yes, but they're also based on certain events having occurred. Yes, things in my life have occurred that have allowed me to found astronism and compose the Omnidoxy and so on and so forth, but those events having occurred are not contingent on belief in astronism, and astronism is not contingent on belief in those events having occurred in the particular way that they're being expressed or have been described. So this is the difference, and really astronism being based on an emotion, I think definitely provides astronism with a much more in a way, observability and empiricism than other religions are able to provide. Astronism is about each individual person's emotional experience and their personal sense of connection to the astronomical world. This is what emotionalism tries to really capture. Going on, there's many other aspects and components of emotionalism. Of course, we can't get through all of it today, but and I've already just spoke about this really in terms of how, emotionalism holds a profound impact on how astronism is oriented. Having emotionalism at the basis of astronism individualizes the entire belief system. It makes it about sort of the individual person and their personal connection to the astronomical world. And then after that, how they relate that personal connection to others. And then obviously that leads to transcension eventually. In this sense, one experiences astronality and then relates this emotion and all the sub-emotions that come to it to the range of beliefs, theories, and concepts forming astronism. A system from which they learn how to best interact and master these emotions. So that's why astronism has been founded. Astronism has been founded in order to guide really this emotional experience of the night sky. That's what astronism is here for. Perhaps the most profound impact of emotionalism is that it provides astronism with empirical basis. It shows that because people are feeling this is not just an event having occurred. This is events occurring in the present, and it's people feeling this emotion. And emotions, of course, can be recorded and they can be empirically studied of why people believe or why people engage with these emotions, why do they feel this way about the night sky. And of course, my experiences of astronality have led to the founding of astronism itself. So you could say in many ways, astronality, of course, preceded astronism, but astronism is, in a way, a guide to dealing with or mastering astronality in many ways. So now that we move on to section 2, we're moving to the functions and features of astronism. Distinguished from the forms of astronism that we looked at in the previous section, the functions of astronism form a framework that relates to how people may interact with astronism and how they may benefit from astronism. We've just spoken as well about how astronism is a guide to mastering astronality, dealing with these emotions. Well, of course, it's really important that astronism provides this service, really. And I think that's really interesting to look at astronism in terms of it as of the services and functions that it provides. And here is just a list of some functions. We've got commitment, you know, in the sense that a person who is an astronist does have some, you know, varying levels of commitment and responsibility in their lives to contribute to the transcension of humanity, but also to contribute to their own transcension, their own astrosis. So there's a level of commitment there. Consolation in times of you know, upset and depression and sorrow. Contemplation is a really important function that astronism provides. It allows people to, or helps people to engage with contemplative activities with regards to the astronomical world, of course. Devotion, we spoke about that in the religious forms of astronism, how the religious aspects of astronism are very much geared towards the devotional and sort of worship-based aspects of the human psyche, and why we need to, or why some people need that sort of devotional aspect to their life. Education, educating people about the astronomical world is really a central function of astronism. Entertainment in many ways, existential purpose, providing people with that existentialization is what I call it, you know, the providing people with a sense of purpose in their lives, a sense of meaning is a really fundamental core function of astronism. Knowledge accumulation, you know, as we go through life, people accumulate knowledge as they go through, and astronism really wants people to accumulate knowledge about the astronomical world. That's a really important aspect as well. Regarding astrosis, really important aspect of astrosis is the accumulation of knowledge, acknowledgement we generally call it. Philosophization, what I mean by that is engaging with philosophical debate, engaging with others in these discourses is really important to the functions of astronism and how astronism provides those functions. Securing an identity, self-improvement, socialization, spirituality, and a sense of vocation. All of these are functions of astronism. And there are others, but these are just some that I wanted to highlight today. And of course, there are many other branches as well of meta-Astronist theory. We've got astroanalysis, which is how astronism impacts a person's life or society as a whole. So this is really looking at sort of how, and we could do empirical studies on this in terms of studying how being an astronist has impacted a person's life for the better or perhaps for the worst in some cases, and applying that to either groups or societies. Diosology, which is the coherence and consistency of the astronist belief system. That's a really in-depth one because it's looking at sort of the logic behind astronism. Does really the logic really hold that coherence? Is it coherent and is it consistent? Epitomics, which is the beliefs, concepts and practices that are definitive of astronism, studying those. What is the most definitive aspect of astronism? That's what epitomics tries to study and explore and come to some sort of conclusion about. Existentiology, the rationale for astronism's purpose. Spoke a little bit about why astronism was founded, It was founded to be a guide for astronality, a person's engagements, emotional engagements, but also the spiritual and intellectual engagements with the astronomical world. That is a rationale for astronism's purpose. So existentiology deals with that aspect of astronism. Introscopy, an examination of why astronism is important or relevant. This again has connections to the previous discipline there. Introscopy looks at, why astronism is relevant. Why does it need to exist? Why is it important? Why do we need to adhere to it? Why do we need to follow astronism? The introscopy looks at all of that. Orthodox ecology. So that's sort of the study of how astronist orthodoxy is established, how astronist orthodoxy is also presented by the institution. Sub-astronology, the study of astronism in relation to secular activities. You know, what is the role of astronism as it relates to sports, as it relates to non-religious activities like mathematics or science or English literature or poetry. That's how astronism, that's what sub-astronology, what that deals with. It deals with the secular interactions with astronism. Subsumption theory, the nature, role and functions of astronist subsumption. We talked about subsumption in the previous lecture, so I'm going to refer to you to that lecture to look at what subsumption means. But subsumption theory comes under meta-Astronist theory because it's looking at really, as I've said there, the functions of subsumption. So it's more meta-Astronist in nature rather than eschatological or soteriological. But it, of course, remains connected to those. And then you've got syncretology, the process by which astronism is combined with another belief system. You know, we've spoken a little bit about the syncretic forms of astronism, how astronism may combine with other belief systems to form new ones. This is what syncretology deals with. So all these different branches of meta-Astronist theory are just all important, really, to the sort of overall understanding and dynamics, really, of what astronism entails. We've also got anti-Astronism. This is interesting. So anti-Astronism deals with all instances where a person may hold beliefs or may conduct in practices that are either rejected by astronism or are really sort of opposite to astronism, opposite to the spirit of astronism. And I use the word spirit there to mean opposite to the essences of astronism, opposite to the principles or values of astronism. Examples of this include sort of acosmism, which is rejection of the worldview of cosmocentrism. Acosmism also refers to, in this sense, the rejection, therefore, that the cosmos is the most important thing, that outer space is the most important, and generally advocates for anthropocentrism or geocentrism generally. You've got anti-cosmism or discosmism, which is the denial of the existence of extraterrestrial life or of the astronomical world as a real environment. You know, some flat earth theorists deny even that outer space exists. And certainly they would disagree that extraterrestrial life exists. So that's an example there of what that could mean in terms of the anti-cosmism element. You've also got descension, which is a form of reductionism involving the reduction of astronist philosophy and religion to earthly matters or human behavior as a means to compare astronism with other moral-centric religions, which essentially, to me, sort of undermines what astronism is all about and tries to sort of skew astronism to conform to sort of the paradigms of pre-existing religions. That's what we call descension. For something to be anti-cosmocentric, it is anthropocentric and geocentric, and instances of darkening of the stars is an act or event that opposes fundamental astronist principles. So what we refer to as darkening of the stars is anything really that is contrary to the spirit of astronism and the values that astronism holds most dear to it. So this is, again, this is part of meta-Astronism, because we have to understand what we are not in order to understand what we are. So really, anti-Astronism and the study of this is really actually very important to understanding what astronism is. So the section 3 of this lecture will focus on cosmocentrism, which is, of course, the official worldview of astronism. And it's something, of course, that I reference all the time throughout this lecture series. And essentially, what it really means is that it has the cosmos at the center of thought and belief. That is the fundamental of cosmocentrism, that the astronomical world really is the fundamental source, or the existential source, and is sort of the most important entity, the most important source of knowledge or insight. Cosmocentrism regards outer space as a whole, as well as individual astronomical progeny and phenomena, to be the most important entities in the universe, in terms of both their function, their longevities, and the insight they possess. Cosmocentrism, therefore, is a type of worldview and value system that places supreme importance or value on human subservience to and subsumption into the astronomical world, so that humanity may understand and know better its highest condition, which is, of course, what we refer to as transcension. And if we remember back to how we defined astronism earlier on, it was a very soteriological definition, and in there we referred to or intimated a sort of higher condition for humanity, or the highest condition for humanity. And that's what cosmocentrism is really trying to orient humanity around, is achieving this highest condition. And the highest condition is regarded to be achieved through the astronomical world as the central or most important environment for humanity. So just comparing cosmocentrism to some other worldviews, this is really interesting because it allows us to understand cosmocentrism perhaps in a more clearer way. Of course, cosmocentrism regards the astronomical world to be central to existence, while theocentrism regards God to be central to existence. Anthropocentrism regards humanity or humans to be central to existence. So there we can see the differences between those. On the second one down, we can see expansion and subsumption into outer space are seen as the source of salvation in cosmocentrism, which was referred to in our definition earlier on, of course. Of course, in theocentrism, God is regarded as the source of salvation and the only source of salvation. Then finally here, human ingenuity is regarded as the source of salvation in anthropocentrism. In cosmocentrism, on the third one down, a focus is placed on the physical, intellectual, and spiritual exploration of the cosmos as a means to discern answers and clarifications regarding existential questions. So really, the astronomical world is regarded as this place, this source that we can really discover ourselves and be able to answer those questions that have puzzled us since time immemorial. Theocentrism is a focus placed on the placation of God. So because God is the almighty, all-powerful entity, being, that we as humans, as a subservient or inferior being, need to placate God. We need to placate God because God has the power to either, grant us eternal life or not. Using some Christian terms there that maybe other religions wouldn't use, but that's the general gist of what a theocentric worldview has in place. Oppositely, anthropocentrism has a focus placed on the needs of human survival, especially above other species. Humans are seen as sort of the most important species, of course, but they're also seen as, you know, their survival as being central to sort of human existence, that really survival is the most important thing rather than, in a way, any type of eternal life or any type of spiritual aspect to human beings. Because generally, not all the times, but generally anthropocentrism does mix well with a humanist, of course, understanding of the world, and also naturalistic understanding of the world. And then finally, you've got what cosmocentrism or these different worldviews are related to. So cosmocentrism is related to ecocentrism, and it could be seen either as a derivation of ecocentrism or ecocentrism as a derivation of cosmocentrism, depending on the way you look at that. In theocentrism, you've got related to moralistic understandings of the world, essentially that the world is split between good and evil. And then in anthropocentrism, you've got related to technocentrism. That's something you really don't see in theocentrism. You see a little bit of it in cosmocentrism, a little bit in terms of space exploration. And of course, we need technology in order to explore space. But definitely technology is not something that you would see in a theocentric worldview, because technology is something that humanity has created rather than what God has created, which is, of course, nature and you know, the natural world. And so those things, that's why that generally doesn't mix very well. But of course, anthropocentrism does relate to and mix well with technocentrism because of the anthropocentric importance of the survival of humanity. And then you've also got section 4. So we're moving on now to astronistics. Astronistics or astronist theory really relates to the different types of astronists around the world that are already emerging in their own communities. And it's really important to classify these different types of astronists. But firstly, astronist theory deals with the concept of being astronist, which relates to one's adherence to astronism, to their self-concept and personal identity. So to be astronist means to really intertwine astronism, to intertwine one's adherence to astronism to the self-concept and their personal identity, to really intertwine their adherence to astronism to who they are, rather than just something that they do or something that they believe in. This is actually them, and it's a sort of a deeper level in a way from just believing in astronism. Therefore, astronist identity, is a person's identity as it relates to or involves the membership of or participation in astronism. The term envoy denotes the role of an astronist as representing astronism, and that their acts reflect astronism. And so, of course, that brings in moralistic understandings or ethical implications, you know, the idea that all astronists are envoys for astronism, and that that really the words and the actions of astronists are reflective on astronism itself. And that's a really interesting concept to consider. We also have astri, which are astronists considered collectively. Astri may also refer to the integration of a person's adherence to astronism with their ethnic identity. We've seen this quite a bit in the Muslim community and in some Christian communities, but less so. And certainly in the Jewish community, where religion and ethnic identity are pretty much intertwined. Whether we'll see this in the future for astronism is something that it has to be seen, but this is what astri refers to, is that sort of integration with one's ethnicity and their adherence or their astronist identity. Prosipatology deals with the study of conversion to astronism, and there's lots of different terms that come under this. We've got stellarization, which is, of course, the completion of one's conversion to Astronism. So this is sort of the final stage, really, of conversion to Astronism. This sort of stellarization refers to, you know, that final step, that final stage in a person's conversion. Reversion is the idea that because Astronism belongs to the oldest religious tradition, which is, of course, the Astronic tradition, which has origins during the Stone Age, conversion to Astronism is therefore reversion. So it's not that that people are converting in that sense, that they are actually going back to the original religion in some senses, but the original religion for the contemporary, that Astronism is very much intertwined with astrolatry and astromancy, some of those very prehistoric practices. And so in that sense, it could be seen, conversion to Astronism could be seen as a type of reversion. Prosan, a prosan is a person who knows about the existence of Astronism but does not convert. A lot of people are prosan because they know Astronism exists, but they've chosen not to convert to Astronism. So that's interesting. Transversion, which is conversion to Astronism while still retaining some beliefs and practices as one's prior religion. That's really, really interesting. I mean, I felt that in some ways, you know, I was Roman Catholic and I still in some ways relate to the Catholic Church, even though I'm part of Astronism. So I think transversion is actually, especially for someone who has been brought up in one religion and is sort of has converted in their adult life to another religion, I think transversion is actually the best word for that type of conversion. And then also we have the concept of enjoyment, the instance of a person reaping benefits from their conversion to Astronism. This relates back to the functions that we were talking about before, the idea that Astronism has a myriad of functions to it that are in a way kind of like services that Astronism is providing, and enjoyment or enjoyment of Astronism is the reaping of those benefits, of those functions, of those services from Astronism. And so obviously for the Astronist Institution, that the heightening of a person's benefits from conversion to Astronism is the most important thing. We want people to feel good about converting to Astronism. We want people to feel that they're enjoying it in a way. That's why we use the word enjoyment there, that they've enjoyed this, that they're happy about this choice in their life. Different titles or different types, sorry, of Astronism or Astronists. There are many different types. This slide does not capture all of them. You've got borners, people who are born Astronism, of course, cultural Astronists, people who identify as Astronists, but are not actively engaged in Astronism or Astronist practices. You have a Coruscant or a Coruscant, which is an Astronist who hesitates to express their adherence to Astronism. You've got an ex-Astronist, which is obviously a person who no longer identifies as an Astronist, but once belonged to Astronism. Lapsed Astronist, mock Astronist, and neo-Astronist. So these are all just terms that refer to different types of Astronism. Oh, sorry, different types of Astronists. And of course, the study of these and the sort of calculation of how many Astronists refer to different terms like this is part of the study of astronistics. Then we move on to section 5, which is astrogenology, which is the sort of sociological and demographic study of Astronism or Astronists in the world. How Astronists are regarded in collectivities, how Astronists are collected together or regarded as different groups, how Astronist populations are monitored, and also the rights and freedoms of Astronists around the world. So astrogenology deals with a very broad, very, very complex area of study that is very, very difficult at the moment, especially to deal with. Astrogenology is important because it explores the manifestation of Astronist belief and practice in the world through Astronists and their adherence to Astronism. You know, and the close monitoring of astronists around the world. You know, we in January, the Astronist Institution published the 2020 demographics report of astronists around the world. And, you know, we need to continue to do that. We need to continue to report on the number of astronists, try and gain some type of, you know, reliable account of how many astronists there are in the world, and how they really, how astronomism is affecting their lives, and how the rights and beliefs of these people maybe are either respected in countries or not respected in other countries. And also another important thing that I've not mentioned about astrogenology is that it also deals with the endeavor to have astronomism recognized in various different capacities. The Astronist belief system, and then you've also got the Astronist Institution and how that is recognized legally, and then also the Astronist community of people as a religious group, and how they are identified and how they are protected. Related to that, of course, is what we've just moved on to now, which is the legality of astronomism around the world. You know, the legal status of actually, you know, can people actually be astronists in some countries? And the answer is no. Quite a few different countries as well. You know, to be an astronist is something that is not acceptable, just like it is in countries where, you know, being part of a new religious movement is not acceptable. The same goes for astronists in this regard. And so part of the work that I'm doing in my PhD at the moment is to explore freedom of religion or belief, and how around the world, you know, there are many communities, both traditional religions, but also new religious movements that, you know, it's a crime really to convert to another religion from the dominant faith. So this is what I'm looking at, and the reason why I'm doing that is because, you know, I want to be able to help not only astronists around the world, but other people, other types of religious groups around the world in maintaining that, you know, the belief in freedom of religion and religious liberty. So just at the bottom there, that's interesting. Related to this is Astrosa studies, which is the study of the worldwide community of astronists, which of course relates to astronistics, and of course relates to astrogenology. I think it's a branch of astrogenology, actually. That studies sort of the overall world population of astronists, which is what we call the Astrosa. And as we come to the end now of this lecture on the dynamics and foundations of astronomism, I wanted to include one of my most well-known quotes, it seems, so far in my life. My faith is strongest when the night sky is clear. And really that kind of sums up astronomism really in a nutshell. You know, the idea that when looking up at the night sky and going back to, you know, the emotion of astronality, I feel a huge range of emotions when I look up at the night sky, and this really impacts my faith in the astronomical world as the source of salvation, my faith in the astronomical world as the existential source of humanity. And of course, that was reflected in our definition earlier on. Here are some references and resources as usual. If you click on these resources and references, that should take you to other resources, because I can't include them all, of course, or else there'll be 10 slides of references and resources otherwise. But yeah, if you click on in through these, I'm sure you'll be able to find even more references as well. So finally, we've got the addendum, which is, I've just mentioned about my PhD work on freedom of religion or belief. If you want to take a look at my proposal that I submitted last November, and then I'm actually now conducting this research now. So it did go through, it was accepted. If you want to take a look at that, you can do through the link. My master's dissertation, as usual, is still available on cometan.org. You can take a look at that if you're interested in the Astronic tradition and its origins. Hopefully I'm going to have some more more content regarding the astronic tradition in the months to come. But we'll see. I'll try and perhaps create some new content on that, because there's new specimens that are coming out all the time that are emerging and coming to my attention all the time. So really, this dissertation, you know, even though it's great and it acts as a foundational document, we need to continue to do work in order to further develop the astronic tradition theory. On the right hand side here, you've got my Astronist Institutional Dictionary, which you can take a look at. That's the most recent book that I've published. You've also got the Omnidoxy, of course, and then you've also got the Concise Dictionary of Astronism, which was published last year. So there are just some Astronist books as usual for you to take a look at. And thank you everyone for listening. So you can also take a look as usual as well at astronism.org and astronism.com. Also take a look at Astropedia. We are also always updating Astropedia with new content, and hopefully in the coming months I'll be able to do a little bit more on Astropedia. And also continue listening to and looking out for new episodes of A Conversation with Cometan. We're still in season 2. We've got some really exciting episodes coming up, so I'm really looking forward to that, which then leads me on to again remind you that I'm going to be doing a huge lecture probably sometime in June, definitely sometime in June it will be published, hopefully, and it's going to be called The Total Immersion into Astronism. So this will be a few hours long, possibly 3 or 4 hours long lecture that will go into every aspect of astronism in minute detail, and it's also part of our celebration of the end of the founding era. So, you know, this is a very important presentation that I will be giving, and yeah, I'm just very excited for the future and excited to develop astronism even more as we go into the establishment era. So thank you everyone for listening, and watch out for the next episode of A Conversation with Cometan. Thank you everybody. Goodbye.